Chapter 10, Courage, from JE2US-A Novel. I don't know, Peter said, looking at James. He seems like he's riding the edge of sanity. Sometimes I think he might be on the verge of cracking up. And then sometimes I think I might be the one who's losing it. James, John, Peter, and I were still sitting in the back corner of the neon cathedral. The others had all left. Well, he's very certain about what he's doing and why he's doing it. It's not like he's just making stuff up. This is all very intentional, don't you think? I wasn't sure what Jesus was up to, but I was quite certain he was sure about it. John weighed in. I'm as confused as you guys are, but one thing for certain. I'm coming to believe that there's goodness in him that I've never seen before. I think I trust him. I think. We sat in silence for a while. There was a sense that we all wanted to figure him out. Maybe that was for self-preservation reasons. With each passing day, Jesus seemed to be pissing off a whole new group of people. And some of these groups were not the kinds to be messed with. Sebastian and his cohorts had power and were not shy about taking things into their own hands. Stories were whispered around town about people who disappeared, and we all assumed that Baal was tied to plenty of them. When you crossed powerful people, there were often significant consequences. If Jesus continued down this path with total disregard for the unspoken rules of Baal, the road was going to get increasingly rocky. And not just for Jesus, but for all of us. It seemed like we were approaching that place where we had better start counting the cost of being in the tribe of this Jesus. Yesterday, we had been talking about this with growing fear when Bartholomew blurted out, "The ocean takes care of each wave till it gets to shore." I don't know where he gets this stuff from. I've never seen him reading, but I was starting to suspect that our waves were headed for chop. Suzy walked up to our table and sat down. The place was starting to thin. When Jesus had finished his story, the place buzzed for an hour, weighing his words and debating what exactly they meant. Suzy still didn't buy Jesus' line of thinking, but she was increasingly enamored with him. I wouldn't say this out loud, at least not in front of Peter, but I think she had a bit of a thing for Jesus. She loved that he challenged her, that he didn't back down from her like most people did. She was used to people that either agreed with her or shut up. Even Peter, of all people, had to spread his stance and brace himself when Suzy's appraisals were dished out with whip-cracking attitude. So now, as Suzy slid into our circle, she said, "Damn, that guy's got balls. I can't believe he pointed his finger at Sebastian and pulled the trigger. Did you see that little twit? He almost shit his pants." Suzy laughed with gusto. "Courage. That's courage, boys." "It also might be crazy," I said, not making eye contact with her. "He's going to get himself killed." Suzy looked at me, almost with a sense of pity. Then she said, "Every man dies, but not every man lives." Then she got up and walked back to the bar. Peter looked at me for a while, then gradually broke out into a grin. Ouch. He threw a light punch at my shoulder. "The chick just called us out. She's right, you know." Then with a bit of remorse, he said, "She's more badass than me." James pushed away from the table and said, "I'm going home, but I'll tell you what, tomorrow I'm going to start carrying a piece, just in case." Sebastian's cheeks were still blushed with residual rage. He sat in his oversized chair behind his desk. His three robed shadows sat across from him, shrinking from the heat they knew was coming. Sebastian looked above their heads on the far wall and saw the painting that Jesus had given him. The knowing eyes of Maddie stared him down again for the 100th time since he had hung the painting. It got the best of him, and he grabbed the coffee cup sitting on his desk and hurled it at the painting. It streaked straight for Maddie's face, but when it was about 6 inches from the painting, it stopped dead in its tracks, then dropped harmlessly to the floor. Sebastian jumped to his feet, reaching for the painting. Grabbing it on each side of the frame with all his strength, he tried to rip it from the wall, but it wouldn't budge. He tried again. The painting wouldn't move. Some hidden power was holding it in place. With his sleeve, he wiped the sweat from his forehead, which was now dripping on the floor. He seemed to gather himself, taking slow, calculated breaths. He walked back to his desk, sat down, and looked at his fellow priests. He pointed across the desk, and with chilling coldness, he said, "Find a way for me to humiliate this Jesus. We need to teach him a lesson. And then I will find a way to kill him." He swept the back of his hand toward the priests as if to shoo them from his presence. They jumped and scurried out. Jesus slipped into the alley from the back door of Lieu des Arts around midnight. The pressure of the day had left him, his shoulders now relaxed, at peace. He had come to find the back room of this gallery as a haven from the chaos, the place he went when he needed to think, to talk to his Father. The curator, Brunel, had taken a liking to Jesus and had told him that he was welcome to come and paint any time he wished. Most of the time, Jesus painted in silence. His brush did the talking, but sometimes Brunel overheard a strange conversation of sorts taking place. Part discussion, part argument. Not like a disagreement, but more like working through a relationship struggle, as if difficult things were in play and they needed to be hammered out. Jesus always entered the gallery through the back door, and he left his paintings there in the back room. Brunel hid them away safely so no one was aware of the work Jesus was doing there. The paintings always featured people, faces, emotions. Some had the loneliness of an Edward Hopper painting, a soul woman in a cafe, or a blurred fog of a Monet. Some had an angular, angry, skeletal vibe that felt almost Picasso-like, while others seemed to tell an intricate story like a Rubens or a Chagall. But always, it was people. It was the story of a person, an individual. It was eyes red with hurt or bodies bent in pain. Other times, it was rampant joy or pandemic expressions of love. Brunel speculated at the source of all these disparate emotions, but he never felt the freedom to ask. It seemed so intensely personal with Jesus that it felt like he would be intruding on the muse, and Brunel had no intention of interfering with whatever was bringing these images to life. Originally, Brunel had mixed motives behind helping Jesus. He understood that he was witnessing something extraordinary, and by being on the inside, by securely vaulting the paintings, he thought he might stand to benefit greatly financially. But as the sessions and months wore on, Brunel came to realize that in addition to these paintings being magnificent pieces of art, they also told the story of a very unusual man. He began to see his role as the sole custodian of a rare history. Deep down, he sensed that Jesus would ultimately be the story, not his paintings. As Jesus turned the corner and headed for his apartment, 3 robed figures, deep in the shadows, watched him emerge from the back alley of the gallery.